Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating question about the identity of Israel, and we're going to do it by looking closely at a paper from the scholar Nazım Fatsa. The big question is this: is Israel a state for all of its citizens, or is it a state for one specific group of people? Now, the source we're using today suggests that to even start answering that, we first need to understand a brand new concept. So let's dive right in.
So this is really the core question the paper wants us to grapple with. On one hand, you have the idea of a nation-state, which is defined by its citizenship and, in theory, is open to everyone living within its borders. On the other hand, you have an ethno-state, which is fundamentally defined by and for a particular ethnic group. The paper we're looking at treats this whole thing like an investigation, and it offers up a key clue to help us figure it out.
So, how do we get to the bottom of this? Well, the paper argues that before we can even try, we need a new tool. A new concept that's been designed specifically to analyze this kind of political system. And here it is. The new term is Ethno-Zionism. As you can probably guess, it's a blend of two big ideas: ethnicity and Zionism. The paper basically puts this forward as the critical lens we need to use if we want to unlock the answer to that big question we started with.
Okay, so what does that actually mean in plain English? According to the paper, Ethno-Zionism is an ideology where the right to rule, political sovereignty, is justified by having a single uniform ethnic group. And here's the really crucial part. Your belonging to the nation isn't just about whether you hold a passport, it's determined by your ethnic background, your culture, and your lineage.
And this quote really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? The author isn't just making up a word for the sake of it, they're presenting a whole framework. The source is being very direct here, saying this concept is the theoretical key to finally answering that nation-state or ethno-state question.
All right, so we've got our main concept. Now, like any good investigation, we need to look at the evidence. The author points to two very specific laws, passed decades apart, that they see as the building blocks of the legal framework that defines the state's identity.
First up, we're going way back to 1950. This is just 2 years after the state was founded. The law is called the Law of Return, and it deals with one of the most fundamental questions any country has to answer: who gets to come here?
Now, the law is very specific. It gives any Jew from anywhere on earth the right to immigrate to Israel and become a citizen. The source also points out that the Hebrew terms for this are pretty significant. The act of immigrating is called aliyah, which means ascent, and an immigrant is an oleh, or one who ascends. So the language itself kind of frames this act as more than just moving, it's a spiritual return. And this is the actual wording from Article 1 of that law. It's crystal clear. Every Jew has the right to come to this country as an oleh. According to the paper, this law establishes a right to entry that's based on identity, right at the very foundation of the state's legal system.
Okay, now let's hit the fast-forward button and jump ahead 68 years. The second piece of evidence the paper presents is much more recent, from 2018. It's a really significant and pretty controversial piece of legislation known as the nation's state law.
This particular clause is absolutely central to the paper's argument. It says that the right of national self-determination, which is basically the power to decide the country's collective identity and future, is unique to the Jewish people. What the source really emphasizes here is that this is a major evolution from that 1950 law.
So when you put them side by side like this, the author's argument becomes super clear. They're suggesting a progression. The 1950 law was about establishing an ethnic basis for who could enter the country and become a citizen. But the 2018 law, according to this analysis, takes it a step further. It establishes an ethnic basis for the state's core identity and the very power to rule itself.
Okay, so we've looked at the big idea, Ethno-Zionism, and we've looked at the legal code. Now the paper brings in the final piece of the puzzle, a visual one, that tries to show what the combined effect of these policies has been on the ground over the last 100 years or so.
So before we see the big picture, let's just quickly run through the key moments in time the author highlights. We're starting before 1937 in historic Palestine. Then we jump to the 1947 UN partition plan. Then to the aftermath of the Six-Day War in 1967, and finally, right up to the present. Each one of these dates marks a huge shift in the region.
And here it is. This is the visual evidence from the source paper. This series of maps is meant to visualize the demographic and territorial changes across the region. You can really see how the control of land shifts across those key dates we just walked through: 1937, 1947, 1967, and today. So how does the author tie all of this together? Well, the argument goes something like this. You have the law of return, which helps facilitate immigration and brings new people into the land.
Then you have the more recent nation-state law, which legally frames Jewish settlement as a national value that should be encouraged. The paper's conclusion is that the combined result of these policies and others is that dramatic demographic and territorial shift that we just saw on the map.
And that brings us full circle, right back to where we started. You'll notice the paper doesn't give us a simple yes or no at the end. Instead, it gives us this new framework and leaves us with a much bigger question. By laying out the concept of ethno-Zionism, the laws, and the visual evidence, the source is really just prompting us to think about the implications. So the final question the source leaves us chewing on is this: what does it mean for a country's other citizens and for its place in the world when its laws and policies prioritize one single ethnic identity above all others? The paper leaves that question with us to consider. Thanks for joining.